When you hear the name Stephen King, you probably think of spine-chilling tales and nights spent hiding under the covers. But did you know this legend of horror was born back in 1947? Yes, he's been creating nightmares for over half a century. And King isn't just a one-hit wonder. He's got a whopping 65 novels and novellas under his belt, not to mention 5 nonfiction books and nearly 200 short stories. Hollywood can't get enough of King's stories. Starting in 1976 with Carrie, his novels and stories have been turned into blockbuster hits. Remember The Shining and Misery? Classic King adaptations. And of course, there's a spooktacular reboot of It, released just a few years ago. But hey, I'm not here to tell you what you already know. I'm here to unearth some hidden gems about Stephen King because, waka waka, I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So let's dive in as we uncover 10 little-known facts about the man behind the nightmares. Let's start with Hollywood because you won't believe this juicy little tidbit. I just did a video on Lovecraft movies, which you can see up here, and included The Evil Dead released in 1981. So I was so surprised to find out that Stephen King played a major role in bringing the sequel, Evil Dead 2, back from the grave. I still stand behind my statement that Evil Dead 2 is better than Evil Dead, and actually think it is the best movie in the Evil Dead franchise. See, King wasn't just a casual fan of the campy, gory cult classic that put the cabin in the woods trope on the map. It's about a group of friends who read from the Necronomicon and summon the evil dead. The movie also introduced us to Bruce Campbell, who became synonymous with campy horror. Stephen King just didn't like the movie. He called it the most ferociously original horror film of the year. And here's where things get interesting. King's endorsement wasn't just lip service. It actually helped the film capture the spotlight that brought people to the theaters. Yes, people started buzzing about it, thanks in part to the King seal of approval. Now, fast forward to 1987, and we've got Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, on the horizon. The production, however, was in a bit of financial trouble, and who comes to the rescue? None other than Stephen freaking King. You see, he had a little chat with his buddy, producer Dino De Laurentiis, who was bankrolling King's directorial debut, Maximum Overdrive. So what did King do? He basically said, hey, these guys need some cash for Evil Dead 2, and they've got the talent. Let's make it happen. And the rest is history. Okay, here's something I had no idea about. Did you know Stephen King, the master of horror, joined forces with the iconic 90s sci-fi series, The X-Files? Picture it, 1998, and we've got an episode called Chinga. FBI agents Mulder and Scully, you know, those paranormal investigators we all love, are on the case. But this time, it's not aliens or government conspiracies, it's a creepy doll causing some serious mayhem in, you guessed it, Maine. King was the brains behind this weird episode and drafted the script. The script, of course, got a makeover by the X-Files writers. Some fans thought it was a fantastic spin on the evil doll trope, but, of course, there were those who thought it could have embraced more of the Stephen King magic, and those who thought it was too much of a departure from the alien investigations of the X-Files. You just can't please everyone. Have you seen the episode? Do you think it feels like a Stephen King story? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. What do Stephen King and The Simpsons have in common? Absolutely nothing except in the minds of conspiracy theorists. Okay, this is so stupid. The Simpsons movie was about Springfield under a dome, so some people wildly speculated that King copied the idea for Under the Dome. I mean, it kind of sounds plausible. The Simpsons movie came out in 2007, and Under the Dome was published in 2009, and they're both about a mysterious dome that appears over a town. Could King have taken inspiration from the Simpsons movie? Well, here's the problem with that conspiracy theory. King wrote the draft for the novel in 1982. It was a 500-page manuscript, but wasn't published. Why? Because he lost the manuscript. Can you imagine losing that much work? Anyway, fast forward to 2009, and guess what miraculously turns up? Yes, the manuscript was found, missing a few pages, but it was found. King polished it up, and Under the Dome was published. Now, when the accusations about the comparison with the Simpsons movie came, King apparently had never even seen the movie and was more than a little surprised by the similarities. King proved he had been working on this isolation story by sharing excerpts from the early writings, but it just goes to show that there truly are no original ideas, just variations on how an idea is executed. Stephen King is retired. You heard me right. He retired in 2002. Yes, this really happened. In 2002, Stephen King announced his retirement from writing. Now, you may be wondering why, and I think this is super interesting. According to King, he felt he'd reached the point of a writer's career when he was just recycling the same stories over and over. He was probably listening to critics who pointed out that From a Buick 8 was similar to Christine, since both were about a car that wasn't a normal car. Right. And truth be told, Christine was the better book. King said, you get to a point where you get to the edges of a room and you can go back and go where you've been and basically recycle stuff. He went on and added, you can either continue to go on or say, I left when I was still on top of my game. I left when I was still holding the ball instead of it holding me. He had 5 books he was working on or had commitments of, and once those were published, that was it. No more Stephen King books. Talk about a mic drop. But you know the rest. King couldn't stay away for long. He quickly came out of retirement and went on to write dozens more titles, proving that you can't keep a good writer down. Stephen King doesn't write on a computer. I know. You picture him hunched over a spooky, dimly lit computer. Well, think again. Stephen King is a pen and paper kind of guy. Yes, he prefers good old-fashioned handwriting with a fountain pen. How retro is that? In his book on writing, King says he tries to crank out a minimum of 2,000 words every single day, and he does it with a Waterman fountain pen. Now, my theory is this is simply how he's used to writing. There's nothing magic about writing with a fountain pen. I've tried it, but it doesn't work for me for a very simple reason. I can't read my own handwriting. I mean, I really can't read what I've written. I think because I hardly ever handwrite anything, I've lost the skill. And not that I was any great shakes at handwriting to begin with. I imagine it's the same for other writers, especially if they're young, because I've heard that young people aren't even taught cursive anymore, which is, of course, the fastest way to write by hand. So I can't imagine hand printing words. That just seems like a nightmare. My favorite writing advice, though, from Stephen King stems from his hatred of adverbs. He said, "I believe the road to hell is paved with adverbs, and I will shout it from the rooftops." He likens them to dandelions in your lawn. One leads to many, and before you know it, your writing is overrun. Okay, let's talk about The Dark Tower. I think this is King's magnum opus, and there's so much to this series, it could be a college course. Seriously. First, it all started with a poem. King stumbled upon Robert Browning's 1855 poem, "Child Roll into the Dark Tower Came," and it set his creative wheels turning. How that turned into an epic tale about a gunslinger navigating a supernatural world on a quest for a mysterious tower is anyone's guess, but I love it. To get philosophical, King wondered what the Dark Tower was. What does it mean? He felt that everyone keeps their own dark tower in their hearts, something they yearn to discover. There's so many little Easter eggs in the series, like slipping in a children's book into the Dark Tower universe. Yes, King published Charlie the Choo-Choo in 2016, a sweet and innocent-sounding children's story, right? That is until you discover Charlie is a character in the Dark Tower series. I also love how his series breaks the fourth wall. King himself turns up as a character in The Wolves of Calla. The Dark Tower was adapted into a movie in 2017, and there seems to be perennial talks about a Dark Tower series. There were rumors that Amazon would pick it up, but for some reason that seems to have fallen to the wayside. If any Stephen King works deserves a Game of Thrones treatment, it would be The Dark Tower. Everyone knows that King wrote under the pen name Richard Bachman, right? At least if you're watching this video, I'm sure you already know that. But do you know why he started writing under a pen name? I used to think, and maybe this was an urban legend, but I used to think that King wanted to prove he could be successful outside of the Stephen King name. But that's not true. Under almost any measure, King is a prolific writer. So after Carrie, he began pushing out book after book after book. The publishing house couldn't keep up. So King was told that he was diluting his brand. He was told that if he published too many books too quickly, readers would get burnt out on his name. So the publisher slapped him with a 1 book a year rule. But he was at the peak of his writing production. He was writing more than 1 book a year. So that's when he came up with a way to get around the 1 book a year rule. He'd write under a pen name, and that's how Richard Bachman was born. King made sure no one knew it was him. Richard Bachman had a fake biography. When Bachman got popular and was asked for interviews, he said he had a facial deformity and couldn't handle interviews. It was like King was a double agent. Maybe no one would ever have known that King was Richard Bachman, except he was outed by a clerk at a bookstore who thought Bachman's style was similar to King's. So he did a little digging and found Rage by Richard Bachman had a copyright registered to none other than Stephen King. But the happy ending here is that King convinced the publishing world that readers could handle more than one of his books per year. So to prove the point, between 86 and 87, he unleashed 4 titles: It, Dark Tower 2, The Drawing of 3, Misery, and Tommyknockers. Yes, that's 4 books in just over a year. Of course, he didn't write them all in 1 year. They were in his trunk of backlogged finished manuscripts, but that would teach the publishing world that the 1 book a year rule was just stupid. Of course, He also burnt out doing that and he had to take a 2-year break, but it's kind of funny to think that we may never have known about the King-Bachman connection if it wasn't for a clever little clerk in a bookstore. Stephen King didn't like Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. Can you believe it? This is a classic horror movie released in 1980 that has made top 10 lists ever since it was released. But King didn't think Jack Nicholson was right for the part and shouldn't have played Jack Torrance like a nutcase right from the start. Of course, maybe a little ego was involved since King had initially written the script, but then Kubrick didn't like it and threw it out. Anyway, the iconic Overlook Hotel was based on a real place, the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. King took his family there on the off-season, and in the hotel restaurant, they ate at the only table that wasn't covered in plastic and had upturned chairs, so it looked like they were eating in a ghost town. Just picturing it sounds creepy. So no wonder King was inspired to turn his experience into The Shining. Of course, when King was an even bigger name, he was able to take matters into his own hands. In 1997, he wrote his own version of The Shining for ABC. This was a limited series starring Steven Weber as Jack Torrance and Rebecca De Mornay as Wendy. I personally don't think it holds a candle to the Kubrick version, but your mileage may vary. The weirdest adaptation of The Shining was when it was turned into an opera. The opera ran 1 week. Okay, so what does The Stand and Lord of the Rings have in common? I have no idea, but Stephen King saw something in Lord of the Rings that made it the inspiration for The Stand. The Stand was my favorite King book for a while until the Dark Tower series was completed, so I have a real soft spot for this novel. The Stand was first published in 1978, and it was a real chonky novel. It's a sprawling story set in the aftermath of a devastating virus and features a cast of characters as vast as the American landscape. Instead of hobbits, the hero is a Texan named Stu Redman, and instead of a Dark Lord, the villain is the sinister Randall Flagg. In the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, it's swapped out for the Sin City, Las Vegas. By the way, if you, like me, read the original version of The Stand and thought it was a huge tome, it was actually much longer. The publisher was actually worried that the glue binding the book might not hold up under the weight, so they asked King to trim it down. Of course, the complete version was eventually published and updated with pop culture references, like a mention of Freddy Krueger, who hadn't even existed back in 1978. Stephen King's debut novel, Carrie, was trash. You heard me. It was trash. Literally. It was literally trash, as in King's wife, Tabitha, found it in the trash. Apparently, Stephen King was so disappointed in the first draft of Carrie that he thought it was garbage and chucked it into the trash. But when Tabitha found it, she dusted off the crumpled pages and began to read. She thought there was something to this story and convinced King to give Carrie a second chance. Now, I know what you're thinking. As soon as the publisher saw it, they realized its potential, and King became an overnight millionaire. That's not how publishing works. Doubleday decided to take a chance and offered King a $2,500 advance. So yeah, welcome to the financial world of writers. But King was thrilled with the advance, even though the publisher had to send him a telegram because his phone wasn't working. When Carrie was finally released in hardcover, it sold 13,000 copies. So it wasn't an immediate hit. But then the paperback rights were sold for $400,000, and it went on to sell 1 million copies in its first year. And to top it all off, Carrie became a hit film in 1976, directed by Brian De Palma. Of course, when translating any book to film, things are going to change, and when King first saw the movie, he had no idea that Carrie's hand would come up bursting from the grave. He admitted, when that hand comes out of the grave in Carrie at the end, man, I thought I was going to in my pants. That has to be the ultimate compliment from any horror writer. Alas, the Broadway musical version didn't have the same sort of success. Go figure. So there you have 10 little-known facts about Stephen King, Grand Master of Horror. Are you a super fan and already knew them all? Or did anything surprise you? Or are there things that I should have included that I didn't? Let me know down in the comments. And let me know if there are other writers of speculative fiction you'd be interested in knowing more about. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be